So what does someone who makes a living using cameras use these days? You guys might remember this trend on Threads, if you're on Threads. If you're not on Threads, get on Threads. The photographers are all hanging out there. But you might remember this trend a few months ago where people were posting like the list of cameras that they've had over the years. I shared mine and it was pretty long. I mean, I went back to the 90s, but it was pretty long. And then I realized I had forgotten a few on there as well, so I had to like add them in a thread. It was really fun to like reminisce and remember a lot of those days. And I know for a fact that I was not the only one who had some long, ridiculous list because we all love cameras and using gear. For me, cameras have kind of been like an incoming tide, but that tide also goes out, and here on the coast, it's like every 6 hours. And thankfully, my gear acquisition syndrome is not that bad, but I did just sell off some cameras and I might be in the process of picking up another one or two. I don't really know yet. And I really hope that none of that invalidates this video, because I do intend to show you guys what I'm actually using in my camera kit these days. Part of the reason that I love cameras and this gear acquisition syndrome curse is that I really just love trying new things. And it's not even so much about the image I'm gonna get, it's about the experience of using that thing. And I guess the other part of me is on that elusive quest to find the perfect camera. But like finding the perfect camera bag, there just is no perfect camera. But as someone who does make a living using the cameras that are all on this table here, I want to show you what I have and tell you why I have it and the role it plays in my photography and in my business. And before I get into this list, I just want to put a couple of ground rules in place. Like, I'm going to leave off my phone. I do use my phone, but I don't really use it professionally or for anything really serious. It's just like everyday stuff. I also have this like point and shoot from the 90s that I've had now for, God, how long ago was the 90s? Like 25 years ago, and it's been with me a long time, but we're gonna leave that off the list too. We're just gonna focus on the cameras that actually help me make a living. And I'm gonna start off with my flagship camera, the camera that I use the most, the camera that has brought in the most income for me, and that is the Leica M11. I have said this so many times on this channel at this point. If you've watched before, you've heard it. But if you haven't watched before, welcome, glad you're here. I use this camera for the experience. There is really nothing about the images I get on this camera from a like professional or commercial or portrait standpoint that I really couldn't get 90% there on another system. But there's nothing like shooting a Leica M. The experience of using a Leica M for me is like photography. That's like everything I've ever wanted in a camera, in a photographic experience, I get on this. While I mentioned that I can probably get 90% there on other systems, there's something about M glass that really just can't be beat either. It has a character and a uniqueness about it that really, like, you see the shot and you kind of know it's a Leica. Some people call this micro contrast, some call it 3D pop, but really you can just sum it up by saying it's the look of the M lenses. And there's 75 years of M lenses available, so you have a deep well to create your look from. And in the same way, the M11 is my digital flagship camera. The M6 is my 35mm go-to film camera. It's actually the only 35mm camera that I use, except for my little point and shoot from the 90s I mentioned before. And if you are familiar with Leica, you know that it's the same experience as the M11. The same layout, the same lenses, the same feeling in the hand, except on this camera, I just crank after a shot and I'm limited to 36 or sometimes 24. Being able to shoot the same family of lenses on digital or film is just an absolute joy. And while I don't use the M6 for a ton of professional work, I do use it for a ride along to my M11 nearly every time I go out. And the only reason I don't use this camera a ton for professional work is that when I'm shooting film, I'm typically shooting one of my medium format cameras. But before we get to those, let's stay digital for a few more minutes. Now I have a video possibly on the horizon. I put this in my concept queue a long time ago called Sony Made This Channel. And it's because Sony was the first digital camera system I used prior to Leica that actually just felt inspiring for me. When I first switched over from Canon to Sony Alpha, I just could not get enough. It brought out something in me. It was I believe the Zeiss Distagon 35. I loved that lens on the A7R3. This is the A7R5. A couple of generations later, I still use this camera, but not so much for photography anymore. This camera for me plays the B camera role for video primarily. And then a lot of the thumbnails that you've seen on this channel where you see a photo of my Leicas was taken on this camera. It's probably like horrible overkill to have something like this be a B camera, but let's just be honest, it is fantastic as a hybrid. And as someone that really admires Sony and their GM lenses, there's nothing like this for autofocus. There's nothing like this for contrast. And if the rumors are true, Sony and Leica share the same sensor, these two cameras do. I feel like this is probably Leica's closest cousin. And don't give me the SL3, SL2 stuff. We're talking about a different system. That would be Leica's brother. This is Leica's cousin. Now, if this is my B video camera, then this is my A video camera, the Sony A7S III, which is what this channel is completely filmed on. The S3 is kind of rigged up here. It's part of my like permanent YouTube setup. I only take it off if I need to. When I'm outside, I'll bring this, or nowadays the Pocket 3. This does a lot of the B-roll whenever I'm filming cameras and just want to get some additional clips that I use on this channel. So the A7S III with the 16-35, that's like my A setup for YouTube. Right now, I've got the 50 on this as my B setup. We'll do lenses another time, but those two Sony cameras are my Sony system. There's still one more, and it's my old A7R3, the camera that I mentioned like inspired me and really just helped me get out of a photography funk when I was switching from Canon over to this camera. This macro lens on here is because I scan film with this camera now. This was the camera that kind of saved my career. Maybe I would say this camera launched my career. This camera even launched this channel as my very first couple of videos were filmed on here. And then of course I was in a car accident. If you've been around, you know the story. And this camera was destroyed, but Sony fixed it for me because they are awesome. And being a Sony Pro is incredible. And today this lives on my negative supply stand where it is my film scanning camera. Now, before we jump into my 120 collection, which gets used a ton, let me take a minute and tell you about Very Good Presets, which is my preset company, my preset shop. Just released a brand new preset called Slide. It has gotten tremendous feedback. It's based on some very well-loved slide films like Ektachrome and Kodachrome and Velvia. You can go check it all out at the link below. If you live somewhere with a lot of greens and you like shooting in the middle of the day and occasionally love that pop of red, then this preset would be wonderful for you. Very Good Presets is what funds this channel primarily, so be sure to check it out. If you like this video or you like what I'm doing here, just picking up a preset helps keep this thing going. So very thankful for all of you. Check out Very Good Presets Slide right below and grab it for 30% off using the code POSITIVE. So 30% off Very Good Presets right below. Okay, so one of my highest watched videos from this past summer was when I debuted this Rolleiflex 2.8F. I used to have a Rolleiflex years ago. It was not a 2.8, it was a 3.5 Zeiss, but it was like this incredible camera. I actually sold it to fund the M6, thinking I could shake medium format off me and embrace 35 fully. Didn't work out that way. I ended up just recently picking up this camera. It is my most recent film camera. Of course, it's a 6x6 big old medium format negative. There's just something about the experience of walking around with this little camera, shooting down at the waist, getting this beautiful, dreamy, 3D pop negative that comes from a camera like this. I've always loved the Rolleiflex experience. I've had a Rolleiflex in my camera bag for many years, and now with this one coming into the family, it feels like we're back. It feels like I'm back to doing something I love that gives me a ton of inspiration. The next one I'll share about is this Hasselblad 500 CM. This is like a classic and iconic camera in every way. I think it has the best shutter of any camera ever made. You just gotta hear it. Hard to beat that. One more time for those in the back. Mechanically, it is the best feeling camera I've ever held, but why I use this camera professionally is that I'm able to have multiple film backs and swap them out throughout the day depending upon what I'm doing. I'm working on a project right now from the Northern Plains. I haven't shared a ton about this other than I'm doing it, but you're looking at some photos now from it that were shot mostly on this camera. And I was carrying around 2 different film backs for different lighting and different scenarios, and I can make a decision in the moment which film back to put on for the shoot. I also love putting this camera on a tripod. I am really not much of a tripod photographer, but I love putting this one on a tripod, putting a cable release in it, getting it all dialed in perfectly. I love looking at my scene, knowing and trusting that I've got it great below, and then just pushing the button to fire that shutter. And that loud, mechanical, clunky shutter lets me know that I got the photo. Now let's talk about the biggest boy in the room, the Mamiya RB67. This camera is pretty special to me because it belonged to my uncle who died in the early 90s. I've made a video about how I came to acquire this camera after it was lost for 30 years. This camera and 5 lenses came to me, and again, I just want you to watch the video. It was like, I think the second video or third video I ever made, and then took a year and didn't make any more until I launched this channel officially in 2023. This camera also has multiple film backs, except this one is a 6.7 back and this is a 6.45 back, which is really cool. You can see the negative size difference here. Now, this is not the kind of camera that I take out very often because it is incredibly huge and heavy. I did a video where I did take this camera around Yosemite National Park. I'll link that right above. That was a really fun video to make last fall. And you can see the kind of images this camera produces. And I did all that on black and white. How I actually use this camera most of the time today is through headshot sessions that I do on film. Earlier this year, I was able to provide some headshots for the board of Black Lives Matter, as well as my friend who does activism. And I did those on this camera with a simple one light and backdrop setup. This camera is huge and clunky and beautiful and a ton of fun. But it's most fun when it's on a tripod, somewhere very still and steady. So these are the cameras that I'm currently using as a person who makes a living doing photography. For me, this is my setup, this is my system, and I enjoy using every single one of these cameras. And speaking of enjoying things, I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know what works for you below. If you have any of these, I'd love to hear of your experiences. I reply to every single comment that is left below. So I'm not just asking you to comment as some one-way street where you'll never hear from me. I very much intend for you to hear from me as well. So leave a comment and let me know what you think. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you next time.